Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have a chilling collection of deep wood stories for you to enjoy. But be warned, a number of these stories are especially disturbing and graphic. This video is certainly not for the faint of heart and those easily triggered. You have been warned. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My neighbor used to be a park ranger for the National Park Service. He's retired now, but every once in a while after a few drinks, he'll start sharing these stories with me. He was working an overnight shift in the Appalachian Mountains on a clear night. It was around 75. About 30 minutes into his patrol, he felt something tap his shoulder. It was a sticky plop of liquid, and instinctively he reached up and wiped it off. When he looked at his fingers under the beam of his flashlight, they were coated in blood. That's when the real horror began. He tilted his lights up into the trees, high above, near 100 feet up, where the mangled carcass of a deer, twisted like it had been crushed in a vice. Its limbs bent in ways nature never intended, and flesh hung from its splintered bone. The thing wasn't just dead. It looked violently staged. And the tree it was lodged in? It had no branches for at least the first 20 feet. No cougar or bear could have dragged it up there. He was sure of it. There weren't even supposed to be cougars in that part of the state. He stood there frozen. The forest felt suddenly very heavy. The next day when he returned with a crew to examine it, the deer was gone. Not a trace of the blood, not a disturbed branch. But that feeling that he was being watched persisted. The second story creeped me out the most. My neighbor wasn't on duty for this one. He was on vacation, hiking through New River Gorge National Park in West Virginia. It's massive. Over 65,000 acres of twisting trails, ghost towns, and sheer wilderness. He'd been hiking a familiar trail when he noticed a faint side path, probably a deer trail, or maybe something cut by bikers. He was in an adventurous mood, so he veered off, breaking branches, and went to mark his route. The further he walked, the quieter it got. No birdsong, no wind, just stillness. That's when he found it. In a clearing was a building, not a cabin, but a full-size structure. And it wasn't crumbling or decayed. The windows were intact. The roof looked solid. No moss, no rot, just there, like it had been dropped in the woods yesterday. Curious, he got closer, and the building turned out to be a church. The front door wasn't locked. He stepped inside quietly, and the air smelled faintly of damp stone and candle wax. But the inside was clean, too clean. No debris. The pews were intact. The altar was standing, and sitting on the altar was a large, leather-bound book. He walked closer and realized something was off. The book wasn't a Bible. The text was strange, no language he recognized, and the symbols decorating the walls and altar weren't crosses. They were unfamiliar, jagged, and intricate, like something out of an ancient cult. That's when the feeling hit him. When your skin prickles up and your stomach knots, and every instinct was screaming at him to get out of there. He backed away slowly, trying not to make a sound. Then he heard a soft creak. He didn't wait to see who or what was there. He bolted out the door and sprinted into the woods, following his broken branch tail back to safety, and didn't look back. Later he reported the building to the park authorities. They dismissed it. Probably an old church left over from a mining town. It was still structurally sound. There was no need to check it. But he knows what he saw, and what he felt. That he was never supposed to step inside that place, and something else must have been in there with him. He said he still dreams about it, the book, the symbols, and the silence, and the footsteps following behind. My father wasn't just a logger. He was a cutter. one of the few trained to handle the sawbeasts known as tree harvesters. Machines built like tanks, armed with spinning blades capable of slicing 100-foot pines like butter. His work took him to the farthest reaches of the wilderness, places so remote they don't appear on any map, right in the middle of nowhere. This job was already off. The road up the mountain had been devoured by time, covered in fallen trees, landslides, and thick, choking brush. It took them 3 weeks to clear a path for the machine. No one was supposed to be up there. No trails, no hunters, no sign of life. Just the hiss of wind and the mechanical growth of metal teeth biting into wood. My father was teamed with another cutter, a guy called Rene. They worked long hours, often sleeping in battered campers parked near the work zone. Pay was based on volume, not time, so they pushed themselves to 16 to 20-hour shifts, alone in that forest, day after day. It began with the radios, strange fragmented voices leaking through their headsets, barely audible whispers, static-laced syllables that meant nothing. They changed channels, but the voices followed. Sometimes it sounded like laughter, and others it sounded like chattering, too garbled to understand and too clear to ignore. The deeper they cut into the forest, the more distinct the voices became. Two men, conversing in low tones. They weren't workers and they weren't from the crew. My father and Rene both agreed something was wrong. They were not lost hikers or survivalists. They were stalking. That's when they began to find things. Odd rusted-out containers in the brush, makeshift fire pits still warm with ash, and trash bags buried under leaves. It was clear that someone else was here living with them. But the mountain was 2.5 hours from the nearest sign of civilization, and there was no way in except for the road that they themselves had cleared. Didn't make sense. Then they found the tent. Rene spotted it tucked into the tree line, camouflaged beneath ferns and filth. Inside one of the sleeping bag, a dented duffel bag, and when they unzipped it, children's underwear. Dozens of pairs. Not only that, but rope, duct tape, then crumpled sketches of stick-figure children being assaulted, drawn with disturbing childish scrawls. Candid photographs of kids at parks, in yards, looking over their shoulders. The apple on the ground beside the sleeping bag was fresh. They weren't alone, and the person out there was far worse than they'd imagined. Rene wanted to leave immediately, but my dad, always stubborn, always trying to push through the pain, refused. He insisted on finishing the job. Just a few more days. They agreed to speak over radio only in emergencies, hoping to hear more from the intruders. What they heard chilled them. One man talking about collecting firewood, and another one complained about the noise of the machines. They didn't even sound like they were hiding. They sounded comfortable, as if this was their mountain. Finally, my dad snapped. One evening after a long day of cutting, he grabbed the radio and barked out, "Who are you? Why are you here?" There was silence, and the voices never returned. That night, Rene shook my dad awake in a panic. "Get your gun. Someone's outside." My dad sat up in total silence, and then heard soft footsteps circling the camper. Something scraped under the metal undercarriage, then a click, the doorknob turning. The camper door creaked open, but no one climbed in. They waited in the darkness, and minutes passed. Then scratching sounds just beyond the door. My dad nodded to Rene and crept to the door, gun in hand. Unloaded. He realized too late the rounds were somewhere in his pack. He never found them. As he approached the door, a flash of movement, then searing pain. A jagged blade raked from his right eyebrow across his nose to his left cheek, and stumbled out of the camper, landing hard. A man with a knife followed, lunging on top of him. Another figure appeared behind them, kicking my father in the head with steel-toed boots. Dazed and nearly unconscious, he saw Renee leap from the camper and tackle the attacker. The second man fled into the woods like a ghost. The other one with the knife scrambled after him, leaving behind only a smear of blood on the dirt and a glint of blade in the moonlight. They didn't sleep that night. They drove hours through darkness to the nearest town, where my father received stitches and a partial reconstructive surgery. The blade had torn his right eye. To this day it looks less like a human eye and more like a slitted cat's pupil. Neither he nor Renee ever went back there. 2 weeks later, the rest of the logging crew returned to finish the job. One of them, a guy called Keegan, went missing. He was found days later, dumped in a ditch off the side of the logging trail, bound, gagged, violated, with his throat cut so deeply it had almost removed his head. The police never found the men. No arrests, no suspects. My father hasn't worked a day in the woods since, and sometimes he wakes up screaming in the night. About 15 years ago, I lived in Sulphur, Oklahoma. My playground? The Chickasaw National Recreation Area. I loved that park so much. I rode more miles on my bike than anywhere else. I walked nearly every trail and rode nearly every road. Every day I would ride my mountain bike up and down the trails and would be home by nightfall most days. One night, however, I had rode out a bit further than usual. On my way back, I decided to ride the trail from an area known as Buffalo Springs, where they have live buffalo roam, and there is a large spring for everyone to enjoy. As I was riding back, I knew the end of the trail was coming up, and I would have to cross a stone bridge across the creek, then up the road to my home. It was dark at this time, and all I had to use to see was the full moon. I was perhaps a few hundred yards from it when I got a sharp pain in my left thigh. I stopped and looked around to see what just hit me. Then I heard a noise sounding like something hitting the ground hard in front of me. There was a rock about the size of a baseball rolling across the trail. I was confused and started to look up the side of this hill. Just as I turned my head to look, I almost fall off my bike when another rock comes flying down, hitting my front wheel. I finally have my eyes adjusted to look and see someone very tall and dark and covered in hair at the top of the hill, throwing these things at me and screaming. I yelled I had a cell phone and was going to call the cops. I didn't actually have a cell phone at the time. This seemed to piss it off. He started charging down the hill towards me, and I, for obvious reasons, lit up the bike and took off. Just as I crossed the bridge, I heard a huge splashing noise in the creek and saw that a large rock had been thrown. I was in the clear to go home, but was frightened all the way there. I went to the ranger station the next morning and told the ranger. He says, "Oh, so you were attacked by Bigfoot?" I don't know, but something was trying to hurt me out there. "Okay, Justin. If I see Bigfoot, I'll let you know." I said it was fine and left. The very next week I was riding in the daylight, when the park ranger pulled up next to me and asked for me to get in. When I asked why, he said he needed to show me something. We headed to the police department in town, and before we got out the car he turns to me and says, Justin, I have to give you an apology. I'll be honest, I didn't believe you when you told me your story of being attacked. But it's come to my attention that a few people in the same area that same night were attacked in the same way, saying they saw a large hairy thing throwing rocks and sticks and screaming. They called the cops and came out with some other rangers, including me, and then I remembered what you told me. When we arrived and started up the hill, sure enough, we were having rocks and things thrown at us, guns drawn and yelling. 2 officers tackled a man to the ground. He was 6'5", tall, naked, covered in mud, and had long hair and a large beard. He'd actually escaped from the Veterans Center. Apparently he thought he was back in Vietnam and trying to take out the enemy. The ranger told me all these things and ended with how I was very lucky, because he was in fact trying to end my life. We went inside so that I could give the police my statement. They had to send him to a more secure facility for treatment. And to this day I still get shivers when I hike that trail and always keep my eyes on the ridgetop. A few years ago, my girlfriend Ava and I, both seasoned hikers, decided to take on a more remote stretch of the Appalachian Trail. We'd done parts of it before, mostly crowded sections up north, but we craved solitude, and we found it in the Mount Rogers National Recreation Area, near the Tennessee border. The plan was simple: 4 nights through dense forest and steep ridges, with the final day ending in Damascus. We left in early October, right as the leaves were turning gold. There was a chill in the air, and we parked the car in a small gravel lot off White Top Road and began to hike with high spirits and overstuffed packs. For the first few days we didn't see anyone, just deer crashing through the underbrush and crows in the canopy, croaking like they were laughing at something we couldn't see. There was a strange beauty in the silence. On the 3rd night, we set up camp in a shallow hollow a few 100 feet off the trail. Ava found it, a little cozy dip between the trees, barely visible from any direction. We liked that. It felt nice, safe, and hidden. That night the fire was low, just glowing embers, and we were tucked into our sleeping bags inside the tent, when I felt her hand on my shoulder. "Wake up," she whispered urgently. "Something's outside." I froze. The woods were still. There was no wind, no owls, no crickets. Just tense silence. Then I heard a slow drag along the nylon wall of our tent. Ava grabbed my arm. "It sounded like a knife earlier, like they were testing the fabric." My pulse was pounding so loud I could barely hear. I fumbled for the Judge revolver I kept in my pack, loaded with .410 shells. I didn't unzip the tent. I sat there frozen and listening. And then a snap, crunch, and another snap. Deliberate, slow footsteps. I unzipped the tent, just enough to slip out and scan the darkness. The moon was buried behind clouds, but I caught a glimpse of movement, low to the ground just beyond the tree line. I flicked on the flashlight, its harsh white beam cutting across the forest, but there was nothing. I stepped forwards, leaves crunching beneath me. Then to my right a crack. I spun towards it, flashlight trembling in my grip. A dark shape darted between trees. Then, back to my left, another sound. Someone or something was messing with me. I shouted into the woods, "I'm armed. Come near me and I swear to God I'll shoot." But nothing answered. I stood guard until dawn, watching the shadows shift like breathing things. When daylight finally returned, I walked to the perimeter and found what I was dreading. A partial boot print in the soft loam, larger than mine, sunk heavy. Whoever left it had been close and watching. We broke camp quickly and hiked fast. No breaks, no talking. The woods felt different now, tense like they were waiting. That night I found a spot near a cliff with a natural stone overhang. We tucked the tent against the rock wall, thinking nothing could sneak up from behind. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Every gust of wind, every snapping twig, sent a chill down my spine. I gave Ava the 1911. Keep it close, don't hesitate. Aim for the chest. She nodded, her face pale and drawn. I don't think either of us truly believed we were safe. Hours passed. I tried to stay awake, but exhaustion finally won. And I don't know how long I was out before I heard movement. rustling soft and careful, and the sound of something being dragged. I sat up, gun in hand, and Ava stirred for a moment. Against the thin fabric of the tent, I saw it. Maybe 5'8", head tilted, unmoving, as if listening to us breathe. I yelled at them to get the hell out of there and that I was armed. Whoever it was bolted crashing through the underbrush. I burst from the tent. Our gear was torn apart, food and clothes scattered. Someone had been rummaging through it with purpose. I followed the trail down to the nearby creek, and that's when I saw 4 of them. Flickering orange lights, held by figures on the far side of the creek, barely visible through the trees. None of them moved. They just watched. I backed away, heart hammering, and sprinted back to Ava. We're leaving. Now. We left everything behind except our pack and weapons. No tent, no stove, just survival gear. As we moved back towards the trail in the dead of night, the forest around us came alive with sound. Branches snapping, voices low and unintelligible, not whispers, chanting perhaps. I don't know. But the noise made my skin crawl. Hours later, as dawn began bleeding through the trees, we came to a sharp bend. I turned around instinctively and he was there, one of them, standing right in the middle of the trail. Just a dark outline against the grey-blue sky. I raised the gun and shouted, "Who are you?" He just turned and walked back into the trees. We didn't stop moving until we hit the edge of Damascus. I don't remember the last few miles. We were running on panic and fumes. I never found out who those people were or what they wanted. But there's something in those woods. It's not just animals or backwoods squatters. It's worse. And I will never go back. This happened a few years ago in early April. I had planned a 2-day solo canoe trip down the Current River in Missouri. If you've never been, it's a spring-fed river winding through thick woods and limestone cliffs. Absolutely gorgeous and peaceful. It cuts through a valley with a massive rain basin, something I didn't fully appreciate until it was too late. I knew it was going to rain. The forecast called for steady showers, but I'd paddled in worse. I figured the water might rise a foot or 2, maybe 3 at most, nothing I hadn't dealt with before. It started drizzling in the morning and I pushed off. The river was calm, the trees just starting to leaf out, and I had the whole place to myself. By evening the drizzle had turned into real rain, relentless, cold and soaking. It never let up. By the second night I was exhausted and wet to the bone. I pitched my tent on a gravel bar that stood 6 feet above the waterline, a perfect little spot. I ate something cold from a can and crawled into my sleeping bag and passed out to the sound of rain drumming on tent. But at about 4 a.m. I woke up. Something felt wrong. At first I thought I was dreaming, but then I realized the ground beneath me was moving. The floor of my tent was undulating like a waterbed. I slapped on my headlamp and unzipped the flap. The entire gravel bar was submerged. What had been 6 feet above the river was now a tiny 3-inch island and shrinking. The Current River had swollen overnight into something unrecognizable, brown, fast, and roaring like a freight train in the dark. The trees along the bank were knee-deep in water, and my gear was floating inside the tent. I scrambled to drag everything, what I could carry, into the canoe, and paddled to the highest patch of ground I could find, a narrow ridge barely above the flood. I spent the next hour in the half-light trying to boil coffee on a camp stove balanced inside the canoe. I was cold, shaking, soaked, but still too groggy to understand how bad it had gotten. Then the sun came up, and that's when the real fear set in. A noise that was low and steady began building downstream, something like a distant avalanche. I looked up and saw it. A cluster of 4 fully grown trees, roots, trunks, everything, were floating towards me. Not logs, but whole trees bobbing in the water like toothpicks carried by a flood current. Behind them, the gravel bar I'd slept on was being churned up and sucked under, stones rolling like coins in a blender. It was all in slow motion and I had nowhere to go. Just me in a canoe, cornered between a ridge and a death trap made of bark and root. One of the trees spun, turning sideways, coming right for me. The river was going to crush me like an insect. And then, by nothing short of a miracle, another tree struck it first. The two collided, and the second tree caught the first on its tangled roots, redirecting it just enough that it rotated away from me. If it hadn't, I wouldn't be here sharing this story with you. I don't know if it was luck or the river showing mercy, but I sat in that canoe for another hour, shaking, watching the water consume everything I'd stood on the night before. When people talk about nature being beautiful, they forget you can turn savage without warning. The river doesn't care if you checked the weather. It doesn't care if you're an experienced camper or just looking for peace. When it wants to take, it takes everything. And if you're lucky, it leaves you with just enough to paddle away. I was young when it happened, 15, but in many ways still a child. I've always been a little bit paranoid, maybe too aware of how fragile safety really is. The morning before school, I'd said something stupid, something I couldn't take back. I told Sam, my best friend and part-time tormentor, that I was going to walk home through the woods. She had teased me earlier, rolling her eyes and calling me scared of everything. The words were light on her tongue, but they burned in my mind, and I wanted to prove I could be a brave girl, just once. The woods weren't even that bad. They cut a quiet line behind our school and led almost directly to my backyard, after a maybe 15-minute walk. So after the final bell rang, I shouldered my backpack and stepped off the sidewalk into the tree line. The first few minutes were fine. The path was narrow and tangled in roots and crumbling leaves that gave way with every footfall. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. No cars, no students, just the brittle breath of the forest pressing in around me. And then suddenly I realized I couldn't see the school anymore. I was swallowed by this rising panic and kept going, trying to laugh to myself. "You're fine, Maggie. It's just the woods." I picked up my pace, careful not to trip over the mess of sticks and rocks littering the trail. And that's when I heard a sound, a low, wet moan. I froze mid-step. My first thought, embarrassingly, was Sam. Maybe she'd followed me to try and mess with me. That was so like her. I rolled my eyes and called out, trying to be brave. "I'm not scared of you, Sam." I stepped around two large rotting logs, ready to catch her crouching behind them, with that dumb grin of hers. But it wasn't Sam. It was a man. A man I didn't know. Filthy and disheveled, crouched low against the wood with his jeans around his ankles and one hand pumping between his legs. His face was smeared with dirt, beard patchy and wild, and clothes hanging off him like rags. He looked up at me with bloodshot eyes and grinned. Then he moaned my name. "Maggie." I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. My body betrayed me. It locked me in place while my brain screamed to run. I stood there like a broken statue staring at him. He smiled wider, teeth yellow and wet, like he could see straight into my soul. And then I ran, crushing through the underbrush, stumbling, falling and scrambling back, the world a smear of green and brown. A scream tore through the trees, raw and primal, and behind me I heard him scream my name again. I didn't look back. I burst out of the trees and into my yard, lungs burning, legs shaking, and I ran straight into the house, slammed the door behind me and locked it, and threw myself into my room. I didn't tell my parents. I was too scared and too ashamed. Ashamed that I froze, ashamed that I didn't fight, ashamed that in some twisted way that it happened to me at all. So, when my mum knocked and my dad asked what was wrong, I said nothing. I stayed locked in my room all evening, curled up on my bed, trying to forget what I saw, trying to make sense of the fact that a man I had never met knew my name. Eventually, somehow, I fell asleep. And it was just before midnight when I woke again. A sound dragged me back to consciousness, a low grunt. At first, I thought I was simply dreaming, but then I heard it again. He was at my window. His filthy face was framed in the opening of my window, which he had slid open. He wasn't inside, not yet, just leaning in, arms resting on the sills. I couldn't scream, I couldn't move. My limbs were locked in ice. "You make me so hard, baby." The words broke something in me. I started sobbing violently, gasping for air. Still, I couldn't get my body to move. My BB gun was right there on the floor beside my bed, but it might as well have been a mile away. He laughed, soft and breathy, like this was all some kind of joke to him. "Please go away," I finally choked out. He mimicked me in a shrill, mocking voice. "Please go away," and then laughed again. And then he began climbing in. I jolted my body back to life. I screamed. And he flinched, lost his grip, and fell backwards out the window. I heard him crash into the bushes, then saw him bolt across the yard and disappear into the dark. My parents burst into my room. I was still screaming and pointing wildly at the open window, screaming that there was a man inside. My dad didn't hesitate. He limped straight through the window after him, yelling into the night. But it was too late. The man was gone. Police were called, and when they arrived, they searched the area. That's when they found the nest. He had been living in the storage loft above our garage. Blankets, wrappers, even a few empty bottles. A human predator, hiding just yards away from where I'd slept. After that night, he never came back. The police never caught him, but I've never felt safe again. 2 years have passed, but I still check the locks. I still keep my windows shut no matter how hot it gets. I still jump at shadows and panic when I hear noises at night. I've never set foot in the woods since, and I never will. My theory? I think he heard me and Sam talking that morning. Heard her teasing me. Heard me say I'd walk through the woods. We passed by the garage on our way to her car. He must have been in the loft then, just listening. I think he went into the woods that afternoon knowing I'd be there, and I think he was waiting for me. I've never felt more wrong in my own skin. I still don't understand why it happened, but I know this fear isn't irrational. Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps you alive. I was 15 when this happened. My family had taken the RV deep into the woods for a camping trip with my aunt, uncle, and cousins. I was the oldest kid, and with a solid 2-year gap between me and the others, I felt adrift, too old for their games and too young to hang out with the adults. But everything changed when I reconnected with some teens we'd met on past trips. Within an hour, it was like we'd always been friends. That night, the adults suggested a game of manhunt. Flashlights were passed out, teams split into runners and hunters, and I ended up with the runners, which gave us a 5-minute head start to hide anywhere in the pitch-dark woods. Earlier that day, we found a strange little path, a tunnel through thick brush that looked more like an animal track than a trail, narrow and low. You had to crouch or crawl through it. I remembered it as the hunters counted down. While the others scattered, I ducked into the path, moving on my hands and knees, twigs scraping my arms and branches tangling in my hair. As I slid further in, heart pounding. Eventually the hunters passed nearby, their beams sweeping over the trail entrance but never spotting me. I adjusted deeper into the thicket, trying to remain silent. Then I saw a side trail, almost invisible, half covered in moss and branches. I crawled in, curious. It opened into a small hollow, and there, crumpled in dirt, was the naked body of a young woman, pale, still, and bloodied. I couldn't scream, I couldn't move. My body locked up and I just stared. Her eyes were open and unblinking, and staring straight through me. My knees soaked in something thick and dark. Then I heard movement, heavy steps, panting. Someone was coming down the narrow trail. I whispered, and the footsteps stopped. Then they picked up speed. I stayed frozen, barely breathing, and by some miracle the man didn't find the hollow. I heard him lumber past the entrance, dragging something behind him. Metal chinked, soft and sharp, like knives shifting in a bag. And then I ran. I tore out of the brush like a wild animal, snapping branches and stomping leaves. He must have heard. His breathing grew louder as he chased me, and I didn't dare look back. My legs barely worked, numb with fear. I slipped on roots and rocks, and somehow I made it back to the main trail, screaming like hell. Lights flicked on, faces appeared, voices called, and I collapsed in camp, trembling, trying to explain what I saw. The adults went dead quiet, then panicked. My mum and aunt sprinted into the woods screaming for the others, and within seconds all the kids were back in camp safely. Police arrived soon after. They found a man creeping down the trail, knife in hand. Nearby, a black garbage bag full of saws and bloody tools. I don't remember much after that, just the nightmares and how I'd nearly died that night. When my grandmother passed away from pneumonia in 2017, she left us an old estate far out in the country, deep in the south. An area notorious for its brutal history with slavery in the plantations that scarred the land for centuries. My grandmother had lived there alone for about 5 years before she passed. She inherited the estate from her nephew. He was 59 when he passed, and my parents had visited a few times, but I never had caught up with college and internships during the summer, so when the estate officially became ours, I decided that after graduating, I'd spend the summer there. I wanted to renovate the house, work on landscaping, and install a small solar panel system. Grandma had been running the place on an old gas generator, and since I was planning a career in solar energy, it seemed like the perfect project, especially with the $150K she left us as seed money. The moment I left the main highway and started down the gravel roads, I should have sensed something was off. Mum later told me Grandma never drove. She got groceries delivered and kept to herself most of the time. To get to the estate, I had to navigate miles of pothole-riddled dirt roads. The driveway itself was about 500 yards long, lined with gnarled old trees whose branches bent inward, their thick canopy blocking out sunlight even at high noon. The trees seemed to lean close, as if trying to watch whoever approached. When I pulled up to the house, it was a nightmare of neglect. Spanish moss draped over every surface like ghostly cobwebs. Weeds choked the flower beds, briars crawled at the porch. The house looked like it had been swallowed by the wilderness. I came alone, of course, just me, a backpack with basic supplies, some firewood and a camera to document the damage. I planned to cook simple meals over the fire. Rice, hot dogs, things that didn't require electricity. I was eager, excited even. Creepy or not, I was logical and never afraid of the dark. The day passed uneventfully as I explored. I found the old well, rummaged through the attic's forgotten relics, carved dolls, dusty antiques with cracked faces, and I discovered a rotting cellar, likely used in the summer months to keep food cool. Out back, near the tree line, I spotted a cluster of stones that at first looked like boulders, but they weren't. They were old gravestones, worn by time and mostly illegible. I counted 27, but the cluster disappeared into the thick brush. I didn't dare venture further. Ticks and snakes likely lurked there. But I wondered how many more graves the overgrowth concealed. As night fell, I built a fire just outside the front porch. Instinctively, I positioned it as far from the graveyard as I could, a vague unease I barely registered at the time. The firelight flickered against the twisted trees lining the driveway, turning their branches into jagged teeth in the dark. The trees stretched overhead like a monstrous maw, the long driveway a throat that disappeared into pitch black nothingness. The half-moon barely pierced the canopy, casting an eerie glow. Then I noticed something. Through the smoke and flickering flames, there was a figure moving down the driveway. It wasn't just a shadow. It seemed darker than darkness itself, with an almost unnatural shimmer, like a black hole bending light around it. My breath caught. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it directly down the driveway. The beam cut through the night, and the figure was gone. Just the dirt road, the trees, the silence. I kept glancing out, but the figure never reappeared. I told myself it was a trick of the light, maybe smoke or a passing cloud. But the unease grew. I felt eyes on me, a watching presence. I checked my phone. Signal was still there, thank God. I went inside and chose a guest room on the second floor at the end of a long hallway, away from Grandma's bedroom. The mattress was lumpy but surprisingly comfortable, and I quickly fell asleep. At around 2 a.m., I woke to a low moan, distant, haunting almost inside my head. I thought I was dreaming until the moan escalated into a heart-wrenching wail mixed with sharp, echoing claps and distant screams. Panic surged. I bolted out of bed, creeping towards the stairs. The sound seemed to be coming from outside. I pressed my face to a window and scanned the yard and driveway. Nothing. Silence. No movement, no light. No signs of anyone or anything. My heart pounded. Was I losing it? I checked every window on both floors, all still, all dark. And after 30 minutes, exhausted and terrified, I was settled on the sofa in the living room. The house's call. Grandma's bedroom was down a short hall from there. Just as I started to drift off, I heard it again. A soft creak from the hallway, then a whisper so faint it was barely audible. But I knew that voice. It was my grandmother's, and one desperate word. Run. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my keys, flew down the stairs, and was outside in seconds. I jumped into my truck, hit the gas and tore down that devilish driveway. The trees seemed alive. Shadows gathered under their branches like hundreds of blackened hands reaching out. The further I went, the more shadows emerged. I hit a massive pothole on the back road and blew a tire, but I didn't care. I floored the accelerator until I reached a run-down motel, the kind of place you pray is empty, and never have I felt so safe in my life. I never returned. This happened around 17 years ago during summer break. My friend and I went to visit another friend who was staying in this tiny remote village in Belarus for the summer. The house was his grandparents', and the whole place felt super isolated. Honestly, it was actually a lot of fun at first. We went swimming at a nearby lake every day, and at night we'd stay up late just sitting by the water, listening to the kind of deafening silence you only get in the countryside, and talking for hours. During the day, we'd go mushroom picking, explore the area, take pictures, and just make some really good memories together. We stayed for a few weeks, but then one of my friends had to leave early because of some family stuff. The only way out was a bus that came twice a week, and she missed it. So she came back to our friend's place and asked if we could walk her to a nearby highway to try and hitch a ride. The main road was about 7 miles away, so we started walking. When we got there, it was midweek, and no cars passed at all. Guess most people were at work or in the city. As it got later, we decided just to walk back. On the way back, we passed through a few neighboring villages that were half abandoned. Honestly, it was pretty creepy, but we kept to ourselves, entertained by singing and joking around and keeping the fear at bay. It was getting dark, and we still had 4 miles left. Then we ended up on this road with dense forest on both sides. Suddenly we started hearing noises coming from the trees. It was pitch dark, and honestly quite unsettling. We tried to joke about it, but deep down we all felt something was off. Then my friend pointed, and we saw 2 huge yellow eyes staring at us from the trees. We just kept walking in silence for a bit, until one of us nervously said, "Must be some kind of weird fireflies messing with us." We laughed, but we all knew those definitely were not fireflies. Keep in mind this was way before cell phones, so there was no way to call anyone. We just had to keep moving back to safety. As we got closer to the village, 2 of us heard a female voice coming from the forest. We looked at each other, both realizing we heard it, while the third friend was talking and didn't notice. I got goosebumps. It sounded so real. And the fact I wasn't the only one who heard it made it even creepier. We didn't say anything until we got back to the house. Here is where it gets stranger. In Slavic folklore, there's not just the Leshi, the spirit of the forest who protects the woods and sometimes plays tricks on people, but also the Rusalka. Rusalki are these mythological female spirits often connected to lakes and rivers. They're usually described as beautiful women with long hair, sometimes said to lure people, especially at night, with their singing or voices. We'd been hanging out at the lake so many nights, and then to hear a mysterious female voice coming from the trees later on, it definitely made us wonder if we'd gotten a little too close to something supernatural. We still joke about those unhinged fireflies, but deep down we all know we saw and heard something we couldn't explain. Between the abandoned houses, the glowing eyes in the forest, and that eerie female voice, it was honestly one of the scariest, strangest experiences of my life. And yeah, I still think about those nights at the lake and wonder what might have been watching or listening to us from the darkness. The Okefenokee Swamp is located mostly in South Georgia and partly in North Florida. I'd been going there since I was a kid. My dad and uncle were avid outdoorsmen, and I grew up learning to love the same things. Now, if the first thing that came to your mind when I said swamp was alligators, you would be correct, and the Okefenokee has some of the biggest around. It may sound super scary to non-southerners, but the old saying really is true. If you leave them alone, they'll leave you alone. Canoeing slowly across the dark, tea-colored waters, if you pass too closely to one, it will quietly slink into the murky depths. He's not coming to get you. You've simply interrupted his sunbathing. As elementary school kids in South Georgia, it was kind of a rite of passage to go on the Okefenokee field trip and be led on a guided tour by Okefenokee Joe. Joe was a true outdoorsman, extremely knowledgeable, friendly, good with the kids and funny. A little strange but generally regarded as a good guy. A local legend. He would get that boat closer to the big gator than my dad ever let me. He taught us kids about them. We even got to hear the mating call of some of the males and watch a lot of their behavior up close. He would also show us all the birds, snakes, and other wildlife. The denizens of the swamp were so used to Joe's boat that they didn't flee when he got close. Great memories. Anyhow, fast forward to my adulthood, and I still have a great love for the outdoors. I'd recently gotten married and was successfully getting my wife and stepdaughter into kayaking, camping and hiking. I'd broken them in fairly easy, calm lakes and beautiful crystal clear springs fed Florida waterways. We'd encountered some gators, but the girls had already become comfortable with the fact that they don't want to hurt humans. I decided it was time to go out to the Okefenokee and show them my childhood swamp stomping grounds. We headed out one weekend, kind of on a whim. I hadn't called ahead to reserve a campsite because I assumed it wouldn't be that busy yet. But I was wrong. Every tent camping site was booked. I was pretty visibly bummed out, so I guess the ranger felt sorry for me. She instructed us to hold on. She was going to check one more thing. When she came back, she had great news. There was a primitive group site available, and if you aren't familiar, these are larger sites that are usually for big groups like Boy Scouts, usually situated away from the main campground areas. They do not have electricity, and we camp 100% primitive all the time, so it wasn't an issue for us. The rangers explained that this particular group site had been closed for 2 seasons due to the road being washed out. They said they had just fixed the road the week before, but hadn't gotten around to relisting the site as available. She offered to sell it to us for a normal fee, instead of the group fee. We paid, and she vaguely shows us on the map how to get to our home for the night. I remember thinking, damn, that's far as hell from the other sites. It's going to be nice and quiet. Perfect. While at the office, we learnt that that evening there was going to be a ranger-guided night paddle. This particular park inside the Okefenokee is a designated dark sky park, meaning there is very little light pollution. I was already excited about showing my family the stars and Milky Way, so getting out onto the water at night and seeing the skies that way sounded sweet. We decided to sign up for the night paddle and headed off to find our campsite. Once we got there, you could tell right away the area hadn't been used in several years. Overgrown, spiderwebs everywhere, and teeming with the usual wildlife. I kind of prefer things this way, so I didn't think twice about it. It was so far from the campgrounds and the main office area, you couldn't hear a single sound of other humans or vehicles. The area was large, so I walked around a bit to find a good spot to set up. I looked back at my map to try and gauge exactly how this little island was shaped, and noticed that what I was seeing and what the map showed didn't quite line up. Whatever, I'm sure I'm just reading it wrong. We set up our camp and just enjoyed the sunshine and the sounds of nature. It was still very early spring, so the hordes of mosquitoes and other various swamp bugs weren't out in full force yet. The bugs in the swamp in summer months could be a horror story of their own. At around 7:30, we loaded the kayaks back into my pickup and headed all the way across the park to the launch area, as our guided paddle was supposed to start at 8. We approached the launch area to unload, and there were a good 15 to 20 people also going out to paddle. Led by a young, enthusiastic ranger, we all slipped off into the water with our headlamps on the red light setting. We exited the small canal we had been traveling in and emerged out into a larger river-type waterway that meandered through the swamp. As we slowly and quietly crept along, cypress trees draped with Spanish moss loomed over us on both sides, with a dramatic orange and pink sunset as their backdrop. The sun finally began disappearing and the stars started to come out. It was absolutely stunning, and still one of my favorite kayaking memories. I'd never actually seen the Milky Way like that before. It was a new moon, dark as could be, and about a mile from our original launch. We all congregated out in the middle of the wide waterway and sat completely still and quiet. The motionless, dark waters of the swamp reflected the skies like a mirror. Thousands of stars and galaxies twinkled above us and below us. It was like being in space. Shooting stars were visible every few minutes. It really was magical. The only artificial light in the sky was the dull glow of Jacksonville, Florida on the horizon, which was about 100 miles to our southeast. And after a while, the ranger snapped all of us out of our trances. It was time to head back. When we were paddling out there, it had been dusk/twilight for most of the trip, with very little light. but enough to kind of silhouette the trees and the branches against the sky, and a slight glimmer on the water. But by now it was pitch black. The ranger told us to switch our headlamps back on to their normal white light setting, so that we could all see well enough to navigate out of the swamp. As each headlamp slowly switched on and the swamp was illuminated, we were met with hundreds of glowing eyes. Now, as I said earlier, I grew up out here. Gators were nothing new or scary to me at all. However, growing up, we never really stayed out on the water past dark. We would shine our lights out over the water to look at all the eyes, but from dry land, far away from all the beasts. Now I found myself and my little family quite literally pushing past floating gators with our kayaks. They were absolutely everywhere, all over the sides of the channel, as well as blocking our way to the center. The ranger was leading and assuring everyone not to worry. He paddled up towards a huge group of shining eyes ahead of us and pushed right past them. Most of the eyes just disappeared under the water, but the gator directly in the ranger's path thrashed, and his tail actually hit the kayak. Sharp gasps from the group pierced the otherwise quiet southern night air, but the ranger showed zero signs of panic, which was reassuring. We all just trusted the young man that we weren't going to really piss off these gators by kayaking straight into them. And as we went along, the sounds of the gators being bumped by kayaks and thrashing were heard every few minutes. There weren't any other jarring sounds or movements, just the constant calling of frogs, cicadas, and splashing of these disturbed dinosaurs. When we finally turned back into the small channel that led to the launch, there were no more glowing eyes. I'd be lying if I said I hadn't been a bit freaked out, but I can honestly say I wasn't panicking. The ranger, being so cool and confident while leading the way, made it pretty easy to stay calm. Everyone started to relax again as we neared the launch, and we got out, loaded up our boats, and one by one headed back to our camps. There was a line of red tail lights trailing off towards the main campground, while my wife, daughter, and myself split off alone into the darkness towards the other side of the park where our site was. I do remember that feeling, kind of eerie, but everyone had made it through the gator gauntlet safely with no problems. Now we were laughing about it and remarking on how cool the whole experience was. We were in high spirits, no stress. We had no idea of the terror that would come later that night. We got back to our site at around midnight and were starving. I got a nice fire going while my wife prepared dinner, and the meal finished cooking. Around 1 a.m. we finally all settled down to get comfy by the fire and eat. I hadn't taken 2 bites of my food when the horrifying experience began. The cicadas and frogs were singing, but you tend to drown that out into background noise because it's so constant. Suddenly, out of the calming buzz of their singing, a sound sprung that I will never forget. A low, rumbling, guttural growl, long, deep, and vibrating in our chests. We all froze and looked at each other like, did y'all hear that? Not even 10 seconds later we heard it again. It sounded really close, like right on the other side of the brush we were camping near. The only thing I could honestly relate it to at the time was the growling sound the T-Rex makes in Jurassic Park. As you can imagine, I was terrified. I've been scared in the woods and the swamps. I've seen swamp gas, freaky figures, and heard screams. I've been in the Marine Corps and encountered bears in the Appalachian Mountains. I've explored all kinds of places. When I tell you, I have never been this scared, I mean it. Pure, raw, primordial fear. I immediately told the girls to get into the cab of my pickup. They get into the truck, and I hop into the bed of my truck with my little .357 Magnum drawn. I figured being back there would get me up off the ground and give me a little advantage over whatever was coming. I told the girls to lock the doors and open the little sliding back window so we could communicate. I started frantically shining my flashlight around, aiming my gun along with it. But I see absolutely nothing. We continue to hear the growling coming from one general direction, not getting any softer or louder, just continuously emitting in 3 to 5 second long intervals, every 30 seconds or so. It was coming from the brush right next to our site. I shine my light all over that area but see nothing. Just thick palmetto leaves, underbrush and pine. No movement whatsoever. Then suddenly we hear the sound coming from the complete opposite direction, more towards the open area of our site. I whip around and shine my light that way, and that's when I notice the dense fog that has settled onto the entire area. It was a damp, sticky and suffocating fog. Almost right away the growling sound was coming back from the original direction. That's when I realized there were 2 of them, doing a kind of call and answer with each other. That's also when I realized the other sounds of the swamp had gone silent. Nothing but the call and answer of whatever was making these absolutely gut-wrenching sounds. It got deafeningly quiet for a moment. Nothing but the heavy fog, which seemed to have a silent sound of its own. My wife, with a shaky, trembling voice, told me she wanted to leave immediately, and our daughter agreed. Now I was absolutely terrified. However, do not misunderstand this. The thought of us just leaving all of my expensive camping gear behind was somehow more offensive. Not to mention I was getting kind of frustrated. I'm at home in this damn swamp. I know all of the creatures here. I'm comfortable here. It's borderline pissing me off that something out here has me so scared and confused. And I begin to rationalize what could be making this sound. Suddenly it started back up again, but now it sounds like it could be 4 to 5 of them, all growling back and forth to each other, overlapping each other now, coming from all sides. A demonic chorus of deep, rattling, soul-sucking rumbles, not getting any closer or further away, just keeping us closely surrounded. If I'd had to have pooped, I believe I would have done it in my shorts. I kept myself at least somewhat cool by affirming it must be an animal of some kind. I wouldn't even entertain the thought of anything supernatural. My wife kept saying it sounded like a big cat, and while I agreed, I knew that wasn't it. It would have had to have been massive lions or tigers to make that kind of extreme low rumbling growl. I racked my brain for the biggest animal it can be, and kept landing back on alligator. Yet we had just paddled directly through an entire swarm of them, some of them absolutely massive, and I hadn't made a single sound the whole time. No, that couldn't be it. I even had a thought that the young, playful ranger had orchestrated some kind of extravagant practical joke on us poor campers here all alone. Really and truly, I had no idea what it was, and not being able to even see a glimpse so I could take a shot at it to protect my family was very helpless. I really wished I had more words for how it felt, just blindly standing in the back of the truck, hearing what I could only imagine were the scariest, evilest, most vile things on the planet, just knowing that they wanted to kill, eat, or otherwise mutilate myself and my family. It felt like an eternity. We'd probably been holed up in the truck for at least 15 minutes by now. It had finally gone quiet again, and I told the girls that we could leave, but I wasn't leaving the gear. I climbed into the cab and started the truck and moved it, positioning it to where I could shine the headlights onto our stuff while I packed it all up. Gun in hand, I began rolling up the tent, gathering all of our stuff and throwing it into the bed of the truck, praying nothing crazy happened like my truck dying or something else, perfectly timed, like that cinematic horror moment. I tried to put on a confident air so as to not scare my family, but in my head I felt so vulnerable, like I was something's prey. The growling hadn't started coming back, and honestly the silence was freaking me out more than anything. That and the fog. I'll never forget how oppressive that fog felt. All of our gear was sopping wet with it, and I swear it was hard to breathe the air. The fire was nothing but a smolder despite the fact it had been roaring bright 20 minutes ago. Just as I was rolling up the very last sleeping mat, one final, closer than before growl shook me to my very core. I snatched that map up and took off running, getting into the truck Duke of Hazzard style and taking off, none of us looking back. I later discovered, once I made it to cell service, that the sounds we were hearing were large male alligators. That sound is their mating call. The louder, lower, and scarier sounding, the more the female gator finds it attractive. Those must have been the swamp's sexiest gators, because I had never heard this sound in my life. I had been under the impression that I knew what their mating call sounded like from my childhood experiences in Okefenokee Joe's boat and with my father and uncle. These gators must have been absolutely massive, true units to produce the sounds we were hearing, because it was nothing like what I'd heard in the swamp. It was exactly like what was in the video. But I'm telling you, in person, you can physically feel it rattling your insides. Though I was somewhat comforted by the fact that the noise were just gators flirting and weren't being aggressive towards us, my wife and daughter still think we were in danger given our proximity. I got into Google Maps and tried to figure out exactly where we camped, because, from looking at the map the ranger had given us, we shouldn't have been that close to the water. I never could quite figure out where we'd ended up. I don't know if it was us being in the wrong place, or the fact that the area hadn't had any human activity for 2 years, or a combination of both, that put us so close to all this mating activity that normally wouldn't happen near areas with lots of humans. Either way, it made for a heart-pounding experience that we still talk about to this day. Also, for a small funny addition to the story, looking back, the most hilarious thing was that my daughter was eating corn on the cob at the time when we first heard the sound. It was still in her hands. So during this entire event of being terrified and hearing the growls, she was holding corn on the cob. I hope you enjoyed the story. I can assure you it was very real, and in some ways, one of the most frightening of my life. The fog, the setting, everything was perfect to make it that much creepier. And I'll never forget that particular kind of fear I experienced that night. I am a park ranger, and many people don't really understand my job. They assume I'm just at a booth, taking a few bills, handing out the odd map, and wishing people a good hike. To be honest, I sort of thought that too before I started. The booth, for one, isn't as safe as you would imagine. Let me give you some context. It was a late afternoon, the sun hanging low, and the sky turning a lovely purple and orange shade. Then, this man pulled up, with blacked-out windows. I caught the sharp scent of gas and cigarettes before I even saw him. I stepped forward, voice steady, but inside my skin was crawling. And that's when I saw what he was holding. A machete. He didn't say a word. He stared at me with unreadable eyes, one hand resting on the hilt. Then, without warning, he pulled back his lips into a grin that didn't reach his eyes, more of a leer of pure malice, and he unleashed a storm of curses, not just angry words, but a promise to harm me. All he wanted to do was for me to hear that. Then he slammed his car into reverse, spinning tires tearing up the dirt, as he performed a reckless U-turn that sent him nearly crashing into the ditch, and he vanished down the road. And that was the last I saw of him, or so I thought. Hours later, just as the moon slipped back behind thick clouds, I thought I heard a soft scrape coming from the edge of the trees. I leaned out of the window, but there was nothing. And then I saw a shadow detach itself from the forest. He was there, standing beyond the beam of my flashlight, the machete gleaming against the moon. No car this time, no words. It was like he was stalking me. I slammed the window of the little booth shut and locked it, fumbling for the emergency button, but my radio was dead. I grabbed my flashlight and bolted from the booth, hoping to outrun him, to lose him in the maze of trees. Behind me, the sound of heavy boots pounding on the soft earth grew louder, the rasp of the machete slicing through the underbrush. I ran blindly, the moonlight barely piercing the canopy, and then I heard the man's voice. "You can't hide here." Panic clawed at my chest. I don't know how I managed to outrun him, but I made my way to a very big rock and hid behind it. He never thought to look and just ran on. I waited for about 15 minutes when I knew he was probably far enough away or lost before I made my retreat back quietly. Then I got into my car and drove away. It really made me think about me wanting to work as a park ranger after that. We were driving through some deep forest in northern Mexico, the kind that looks straight out of a horror movie. Endless pine trees, fog hanging low, and barely any other cars. It had rained earlier, so the air was thick with that wet earth and pine smell. The road was all twists and turns, there being no streetlights, just nature. At some point, we took a wrong turn. No big deal, or so we thought. Just a dumb mistake. But I was annoyed, because I'd wasted time for no reason. So we turned around and got back on track. Then as we came out of this curb, we saw it. A massive tree had just crashed across the road. And I mean it. The roots were still wet and muddy, like the ground had given up on holding them. If we hadn't have taken that wrong turn, if we hadn't have wasted those few minutes, we would have been under that tree. No time to brake, no way to dodge. Just a straight-up final destination moment, and I'm 100% sure the timing would have just been us right there. We sat there staring at it, my heart pounding, as the rain hit the car. I was pissed about losing time, and now I couldn't stop thinking about how those stupid minutes wasted had probably kept us alive. It still freaks me out. Sometimes the universe messes with you in the best possible way. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. You can always let me know if you did, and if you would like some exclusive extra content, feel free to join the membership page by clicking join, or follow the link down to Patreon for some more cool perks. That's it from me. I hope to see you Thursday for some truly chilling hotel stories. And a little update for you all. I'm planning something special for June, my birth month. I'm hoping to be doing one video a day, Monday through Friday, big compilation on Saturday, rest up on Sunday, and start all over again. A month-long bonanza of content, and some of the stuff I have in store is going to be wild. So I hope to see you there.